Excited to have you guys with us as well, and that you don't get sharing our hearts with you as we share this lesson.
With the next generation for a better. Melissa Tolick will be coming up. So the title of my part of the powerful is Feed the Lambs. In this church, Susan and Jim, in 36 years, I've been elder for 18 years, graduating high school, learn. But from Jesus' perspective, but it's going to start. Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, he said, you know, Peter asked 3 times. And end his death by saying, feed the lambs. You know, in our fellowship of churches, we've said the children, and that practical terms. When you drop a stone in water, it radiates from there. Started by evangelists and women's ministry. Our congregations. The ripple effects. If you do, children want to go to church, it's maybe and the relatives, and then the friends. Exciting and personal. It can have an opposite effect too. Before, eventually, my parents started looking for a and I remember them and I know my dad, 2 of each of us in between, so they kept us in line. Anything for us to try and sit quiet. And so to the bed, I'd lose my everybody ready in time. They started slowing things down. And the ripple effect was my parents, they gave up the fight the rest of their life. Sabotage them, I was trying to sabotage them. looking back on it, and my invites to they weren't interested. Children now, we see asking up our kids about the impact how it a mess out all over the world and has an impact, a positive impact. The church grows fast in places that it hadn't been before. In this pandemic, though, we've had the reverse effect. It's collapsed families to the very nuclear family. We've been contained. We've been isolated. And even grandparents haven't been able to visit. I know for a long time, for months at a time, we were only able to do a drive-by. We would get in the car, get a little gift for them, and go by their house, and they'd wave from the yard, and we'd hand off a gift to the parents for the kids. But there was no contact, no hugging, no being part of the family or feeling close to them. I know with my granddaughter, it hit me because her first birthday party, we decorated our vehicles and drove her on their block and handed the presents out the window and waved at her. And it felt like this isn't living, because even if I get the virus now, I'll never have contact. So we have to figure something out. But it's even harder on them. And I think because of that, the families, our younger families, have been the slowest to reintegrate back into our fellowship. And I don't know exactly how to fix that. I'm hoping in time they'll come. I know the children's ministry is pouring back in the volunteers and the finances to make it work, but it's not the same. And if the kids don't want to go, what happens to children's ministry? See, right now, schools are opening again. And some kids have been going to school last year. Some kids really haven't been going for quite a while. But now the parents are having to get their kids back out the door. In the same way I drag my feet, some kids are more than happy to go back to school. Most of the parents are really happy for the kids to go back to school. But some children are not excited. They're going to put up a fight. So if you're putting up a fight to get your kids out the door for 5 days, Monday through Friday, and Sunday comes, do you want to fight that fight again? I talked to a father recently as part of our church. His kids are under 10. And he said his kids are already telling me that they don't want to go to church. How much longer will he and his wife put up the battle? So it's going to be important that everybody, not just you in this room, because I know you're here because you care about the kids and want to be involved, but outside of this room, those that are listening now and will listen in the future, we need all hands on deck, as the old saying goes. 2 Timothy 4:5. But you, keep your head in all situations, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, discharge all the duties of your ministry. Historically, the ICOC has taught our evangelists and women's ministry leaders to speak openly and forcefully from the stage, from the pulpit. We focused on strengthening, teaching, and building up the membership, but also reaching out to those that didn't have a relationship with God. More so now, I think we have to focus beyond the stage. We have to go beyond what we see from the pulpit, and that is in our behind-the-scenes ministry. And I say children's ministry is behind the scenes because it usually is. If you don't have children you're dropping off or picking up, you might not even know there's a children's ministry, because by nature, children's ministry is usually put aside away from the main hall because of the noise and the activities and all that stuff, so you don't even know what's going on. And a lot of our ministry people sometimes can feel like the biggest part that they have to offer is the finances, making sure the finances and volunteers are there to build a successful children's ministry. But it has to go beyond that. If you want young families to be involved, you have to be involved yourself. I think too many of our ministry people have not seen what goes on and the volunteers and how much work goes into it. But I think more importantly, if you want young families to join the church, be out there greeting them, greet their children. You want young families to be engaged? Same thing, greet their children. Too many times I've seen where people come to church, and even our own family of believers, we leave, we pick up our kids, we go out in the main fellowship, and we fellowship with people, and our kids are by our side, and eventually get bored and start tugging on us and wanting us to go because they're hungry or they're tired or they want to do something else and stand there and watch you talk. And too many times we don't integrate. To my own shame, I look at this, I didn't get down and get my kids involved in conversations, and neither do other people. The only thing I realized is that they were there at some point. I looked down, my hands are full of papers and crafts and stuff they've stuffed in my hands because they didn't want to hold it anymore. But we're not getting our kids involved. And our kids need to know from the adults down, just like Jesus drew the kids in, they need to know that we care, that we know their name, and that we care about them. Next is looking at an old discipleship verse. But I want to look at it differently. Luke 9:25. What good is it if someone gains the whole world, but loses or gives up their very self? You know, our very self is represented by our children. Not just our children, but the church's children. You know, a lot of times we used to hear the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a fellowship to raise a child. It takes a fellowship of everybody, a bunch of aunties and uncles. Like in Hawaii, they call it ohana. It's auntie and uncles. Our self is represented. And we all know people who've grown up in the church who are mature now and have seen their kids wander away from the faith. And they're not part of the church anymore. And yet these people, and a lot of them are friends, keep serving. I know a lot of them still serve in children's ministries, still help out, still do things in camp and all that. But it's very disheartening because they've been through all the ups and downs of the church, and they've stood their ground and not given up and been steadfast. And their hope is one day their kids will come back. We owe it to them to make a great family ministry. We owe it to them to have an all-involved family ministry. Because now some of them, like us, have grandchildren. Our children have had their ups and downs. They're grown up now. They have their own children. They've had their ups and downs. But we know we planted a good seed. Now we planted a seed in our grandchildren. And we want them to remember that this seed is planted. Now, the reason I believe in the negative ripple effect because of my personal example, I also believe in planting the seed because of our personal example. Both Susan and I are here because of Vacation Bible School. Not that our parents took us to Vacation Bible School, but other people got us involved in Vacation Bible School and had an impact on us. And it made a difference. I still have my little Bible. I was sent like a little mother duckling with my brothers and sisters off to vacate. There's a church nearby that had a Vacation Bible School. My parents stayed in bed, spread the newspaper out, drank coffee, and they sent us out to Vacation Bible School. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I look back and that's where I started to think about God, the big picture about God. So maybe some of the things that we're doing right now, we'll see kids grow up and walk and leave the faith, but that seed is planted. And we're hoping that when the time is right, they'll come back. But we do need everybody involved, from the lead evangelist all the way down. Not just, a lot of times it's the women on staff that are involved. I think it's so important for the men on staff to also be involved. And if you have the desire to do that, but your schedule is too busy, you can find a way out of your schedule. I think sometimes we spend so much time worried about the technology and making our services great that we stress ourselves out and we lose why we're there. We're there to worship. We're there to fellowship. We're there to walk among the people. We're not there to get all tangled up in what's working and what isn't working and spend all our time plugging on buttons. Thankfully, we have somebody like Jose plugging our buttons today, so we don't have to worry about that. But we do have too many things that we get involved with that takes us away from each other. And more importantly to me is the children. I have made it a very big point now to get to know children's names. So if it's a family standing there, as age appropriate, I'll go down give the kids a hug, get to know their name, ask them questions, look at their craft and all that stuff, and not just look past them to the parents. I think that ingratiates parents. I think parents love it when you take an interest in their children. And in this world, children have no natural refuge anymore. Let me repeat that. There is no safe place. I think of school should be safe. It's not always safe. Sports, not always safe. Camps, home, not always safe. Relatives, there's a lot of places that are not safe. Church should be the one place that we can count on to be safe, that they're protected, that they're guarded, that they can be themselves, that they can just have fun and smile and laugh and connect. And if we can make that, it'll draw our families in. It'll make a difference. I play a game called tag. Does everybody know what tag is? All right, so somebody's it. That's usually me. The 4 granddaughters are free to run around, and I have to catch them. But there's a place called Goal. I thought it was Goal, G-O-L-A-L, but it's actually G-O-O-L. There's a place called Goal. That's their safety place. That's the place they can't be tagged. And I'm not unaware when I'm running after them that they stay really close to that goal, that they don't go too far. So if I start getting close, they get down, and they get such a kick out of that. But where is their goal in life right now? Where is their place that they can be safe? And they can feel like they're not going to get tagged by all the negative things that are going out there. It shouldn't be just the goal, it should be God. That's what we want. We want their connection with God. And I believe that in our church, the most vulnerable, the most needy, the most important people in our church are our children. And they shouldn't get the leftovers from any of us. They should get our best. Years ago, there was 2 sisters in our church. Both their families were going to church. And one sister eventually stopped coming with her family. And the other sister's still part of our fellowship and her family. But I remember I went to the sister's mother's funeral. And this now young lady came up and gave me a hug. And I barely recognized, I did recognize her a little bit, but she was part of the family that left the church. But she told me, when I was little, I remember you making church fun. I remember going to church and you knew my name and you made church fun. And it made such an impact to me. It was the best thing that could have happened, because sometimes you do these things and you wonder, does anybody notice that I'm doing this? You don't get the recognition. You're not brought up all the time for your service, but God knows. God knows what you're doing. So find a way to free your schedule. If you're on staff and if you're in children's ministry, find a way to get your staff involved. All the staff, top to bottom. And sometimes there's a disclaimer: you can't serve or you can't be in children's ministry. And I know Susan and Melissa will be talking about that. But according to the state or your country, get screened, be part, show up, listen, talk, teach in the children's ministry, in the middle school, the preteen, the teens. Get involved from top to bottom. If there's a group of teens talking in my church right now, I bust them up. I don't yell at them to spread out. I just go in there and jump into their conversation and start joking around with them, because I want them to feel that this is their church too. Another personal story: years ago, my son was baptized as a young teen, and he came up to me one time, a short time after that. He said, "Why is it that I keep on feeling like they treat me like a child over a brother in Christ?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Because they come up and they tap him on the back and say, 'Hi, buddy. Hi, pal. How you doing?'" I said, why don't they know my name? And why don't they greet me like a brother? And I went and talked to the staff about it, and they agreed. And he said, that is true. We need to treat them with respect by their name. And so, for the record, his name is Tyler. He's still a brother. He's married with a wife named Tana. He's got two kids named Christmas and Honor, and they know his name. And he's involved. Him and his wife are coordinators with children's ministry because of people like you that made a difference. During this conference, you're going to hear a lot of things that are important, There's a lot of things that we all need to do. You're going to go to one class, and this is going to be the most urgent. You're going to go to this class, and this is going to be the most urgent. You're going to have a long list of things that you can't possibly implement. But I can say, if I can say, this is one of those that please hold on to and remember. Please look at children differently, not as just a tag along, but as an important part, because it'll make such a difference to the parents and the people that are visiting. Now at this point, I'm going to introduce my wife, and I want you to understand this is the same person, but she is the wife of one, me, 39 years, the mother of two, 36 and 33 respectively, the nana of 4, 9, 8, 6, and 6, co-owner of a security guard company, works admin for the church, Phoenix Church of Christ, part of the Asia Pacific Mission Foundation, and also Youth and Family and Children's Ministry Task Force. So with that, I'll sit down and hand it over to my wife.
So thank you, guys. This is my passion. This is, my granddaughters it reinvigorated me. I was always, even while the kids were young, I was actively involved, and then took a few years, but when you have grandchildren, you kind of get re-engaged in what you want to be as part of their life. And so I'm very grateful to partner not just with my husband with this, but with Melissa Tulloch, who you'll get to hear from in a few minutes. She's just an amazing partner with me through this process. And so just so excited to be able to partner with so many people across the country to try and bring the children's ministry to a new level. We had the pandemic, and in some senses, this is like a reset. We get an opportunity that we don't have to go back and do children's ministry the old way. Sometimes those things aren't working anymore. And we're finding people are having to just really reevaluate and to decide how to reinvent what is going to be for the children. The partnerships are needed. The partnerships for an exceptional children's ministry, obviously we're partnering with the parents first, right? And then we want to help the parents have tools and resources that they need to bring their kids to faith. That's the goal. Ultimately, we want to help bring those kids to faith in God. Not just teach them the good things about their character, not just about kindness and gentleness, self-control, obey your parents. That's not really what we're wanting in this. You guys at home can teach a lot of those things, but what we want to help is partner with the parents to bring the kids to faith. And Melissa's going to focus on that a little bit more. So obviously when you have a whole bunch of different groups of people, they're trying to bring them all together to unity sometimes is hard, whether it be ministry staff or a lay leader or someone who's been in children's ministry for a week, someone been in children's ministry 40 years. So you have a lot of different perspectives coming into this. And so I get the privilege that I get to talk about the hard stuff. So I get to talk about the things that have to happen almost even before a kid enters the room, okay? And that is the crucial part about policies, procedures, and risk management, okay? So the scripture references, we keep watch over yourselves and all the flock, which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Be shepherds of the church of God, which he bought with his own blood. I know that after I leave, savage wolves will come in among you and will not spare the flock. The world right now is a savage wolf. That we really have to watch the flock, guard the flock, be shepherds of the flock. And that goes all the way down. I think that there are both sides of this. I think the young children are part of this, but I think also our elderly are part of this. People who are now homebound. And so I think both sides of that's a different class. We'll focus on the kids. So safety and risk management. So this is the least favorite subject about children's ministry. And can be the most overwhelming, okay? So please don't get overwhelmed. We're going to talk about this several times, that if you get one thing, take one thing you think, I can do this in my children's ministry. Or okay, well, I'm doing really good at this side. Let me focus on this side. So wherever you are in your children's ministry, just don't get overwhelmed. That would be the first thing. So managing your risk, okay, for those of you who don't, children's ministry, youth ministry is a huge risk to the church, okay? Anytime you have children who, with the world going on, there is a risk to any event. There's a risk to a teen worker driving a teen to the teen event, because you don't know what kind of traffic is going to be out there. You don't know. So you want to prepare for as if something was going to happen, and hopefully all your preparation leads you to nothing happening, is what you're wanting. So how do we do this? How do we manage our risk? Most of the time we're teetering on this right here. So we're like, okay, is this good enough? Is this good enough? What do I need to do? Okay, am I protected? I am a big picture person. I'm also the town crier. If there is something that can happen, my mind is going to go there. Good strength, terrible weakness. Same thing. So, but a lot of times with risk, this is how we think about it. And a lot of times, especially church leaders, do not even understand this part of the. So, but what you want to do is to do an assessment of where your children's ministry is right now. And look at it from a risk management perspective, not just at the classroom, not just your curriculum, but looking at your risk. Where is your risk? Okay? Mercifully, we've had a lot of great examples of people coming before us that have implemented a lot of these procedures. But some of the churches have done away with some of that stuff. But we have to really go in to identify, to assess, to plan, to implement, and to communicate, because that's going to be your basis. If you don't have the communication, you can identify and assess and plan all you want. Your ministry will go nowhere, okay? It has to be a full thing. So we want to look at a couple of things we look at to reduce risk. The whole thing we're trying to do is we want to reduce the risk, okay? And look at the things that we can. The first one we want to look at is screening, okay? The purpose of screening is not just to do busy work and paperwork. It is for the children's safety, first and foremost. Secondly, the thing we don't think about a lot of times is a church's reputation, okay? If something happens in your children's ministry and the news gets called, one incident can destroy a church's reputation, okay? In Australia, right as COVID came out in Australia, they had the church service, and a person came in to the church service and spread COVID to pretty much a big part of the church. So of course that made the news, oh, going to church, you're going to be a church spreader, a COVID spreader. And it didn't destroy their reputation, but it certainly led to a negative press. But in the same way, this aspect of something happening in children's ministry can also hurt the church's reputation. But the other thing is for parents' peace of mind. If parents know that you have screened and done due diligence with everyone in the classroom, it's a peace of mind, and for that to be public knowledge, okay? So anyone who comes to church, they're going to know, oh, our children's ministry, we screen all of our people. We, have the background check. We, they're not on the criminal watch list, or, and we talk about those kinds of things because people feel more comfortable knowing that they are actually screened volunteers. And a lot of that we do, they've seen of 142,000 background checks conducted by 7,700 churches, that they had a criminal offense of 21%. So over 9,000 felonies in 142,000 background checks. And so a lot of times we think, oh, that's not us. Please let's dispel that. We are not anything different than other churches that are out there. So I just wanted to spell that. So, just looking at that, God changes lives. Okay, we all know that. But some of those lives that have a criminal record should not be serving in children's ministry. And we need to know that. And people, we need to be able to ask those questions. But what questions should we ask and what shouldn't we? Okay, now the world comes up with the laws of what we should and shouldn't ask, okay? So you do have to know each state, and I'm going to say this multiple times, every state has different rules and laws that govern children's ministry, okay? You have to know what your state laws are if you are going to be responsible for children's ministry. For example, some churches or some states are what they call a ban-the-box state. Anybody heard of ban-the-box? Okay, a ban-the-box state means that you cannot ask a volunteer in the first pass if they've committed a crime. Volunteers or employees, either side. So they say, afterwards, after you've initially screened them, you can come back and do a secondary screening that asks that. And so you want to think outside the box on your questions. Run them by risk management. Run them by a legal committee. Don't do this on your own, okay? People do intentionally infiltrate churches, okay? So there's my 142,000 background checks. So another way you reduce risk is by your policies and procedures, okay? So you want to think about what are the pitfalls and best practices for children's ministry. I'm only going to list a few. There's tons of them out there. You have to look at how your church is fixed and where you work from, what your locations look like. Some of the ones important that a lot of people, they've kind of negated, same person checking in and checking out. The only thing that stopped us from an attempted kidnapping is this one simple little rule. You have to check your kid in. The same person has to check them out. We had a situation, the mom checked them in. The dad had lost custody the day before. Dad comes in and tries to take them from children's ministry. I'm like, well, he's on the form, he's allowed to, but he wasn't the one who checked them in. So the only thing that saved us a custody dispute. Collecting sign-in sheets, make sure they're legible, scannable, and searchable. Okay, if you're still doing paper transactions, you may have to go back at some point and search and see if someone was in the classroom. I did. I went through 4 years of old, wet, moldy papers to determine that a guy who had been arrested in our congregation for child abuse for his own children was never in our classroom. But I don't want to give you the fear factor, but those are just the facts that we have to know, that there are those situations, and that this is a simple practice that protects us. Most of the states used to have a 2-year statute of limitations on this, but with the Catholic Church and all the things that have gone on with that, a lot of the states have lifted it, and it's now 2 years after their 18th birthday, and in some states it's forever. So you don't want to be where you've tossed out all of these sheets that actually can prove someone wasn't in the classroom without having them scanned and searched, because you may be involved in litigation at some point with that process. So other things is, a lot of us are mobile church, so there's mobile church issues that we have. So having fire drills at regularly used locations, security uppers to serve as a buffer between the public and our children. How many times in here have you seen people their kids run off and go to the bathroom by themselves, and that happens in our church. There are people, that in children's ministry, we have to have a buffer between the public and our kids in order to keep them safe. So have an emergency lockdown plan. Nobody wants to have an active shooter, but we do have to be prepared for it in these settings, because we've seen it. We've seen it in the schools. We've seen it in churches. It's awful. The drama but it is there, and we do have to be prepared for that. So another thing about reducing risk is incidents and reporting, and making sure that we understand what mandatory reporting looks like, okay? Every state's different, but in order to do children's ministry, you have to understand what mandatory reporting is, okay? It's the law, okay? In 18 states, every person who is a resident of that state is a mandatory reporter. That means if you know or you suspect that someone is being abused, being neglected, you know, in their home, you are legally obligated to notify the authorities. Okay? Not all states give clergy penitent relief. Meaning, just because you're clergy does not mean that if someone tells you something in confidence that you are not mandatory reported to say so. So that's why each state is different. Some have a clergy, you know, if you tell a clergy member, they don't have to report. But for the most part, they do have to report. So again, if you have an accident, if somebody gets hurt, you want to document. Everything is about documentation in children's ministry. Then also knowing your state laws for mandatory, but the biggest thing is working with your board of directors to have a risk management committee. This will be your biggest ally to be able to have a safe children's ministry, okay? Because the board directive, okay, so if you think about a church and a hierarchy of church, okay, you have your board. That is who is legally and fiduciary responsibility to the state of which you have your church and or your nonprofit, okay? So that's the first level of responsibility. Then underneath that, you have your evangelists and your women's ministry leaders. And then underneath that, you have your children's ministry and those people that are serving in children's ministry. But in order to, their biggest bridge is this risk management committee, because they are going to report to the board and help facilitate what happens. Biggest time we use this is at camps. Almost always at camp, somebody's gonna get hurt. You know, something's gonna happen at camp that we've got to figure out about, you know, how we're gonna do with it. What are we gonna do with it? Sadly, a lot of times these situations involve teenagers confessing, cutting, or, you know, that their parents, you know, they have issues with their parents. But this whole will protect you, it protects your church, it protects the board, and a lot of the boards don't understand how legally responsible they are for children's ministry. And so we're here saying, here's what we can do to help that. So then the other part is that if they're not a mandatory reporter, there is what's called permissible reporting, okay? So you have your mandatory and then there's permissible. If you are not in a mandatory reporter state, but you feel obliged by your conscience that you need to report, because that is absolutely permissible in those settings. And again, clergy is not protected in every state, and 18 states and Puerto Rico, including Oklahoma, New Jersey, Wyoming, require all persons to report without specifying any professions, okay? So you think about, why do we report and why not, okay? Do you have to report? And so, reasons why people don't report, okay? They don't believe that the person could have possibly done that. I know the family. There's no way that Johnny's dad smacked him upside the head or beat him with a belt. I know that family. Or there's no way that they did X, Y, Z, okay? And that's the reason why that wasn't reported, okay? The reason, we've been working to heal the victim and it wouldn't benefit the family to drag them into court, etc., okay? And I'm just giving you the things that we've heard over this period of time. They didn't have proof. I heard something, but I really don't have proof. Another one, the father was repentant, the victim was counseled to forgive and to restore their relationship. So dad says, I'm sorry, I repent, I'm not gonna do this anymore. Daughter was, you just need to forgive your dad, and then a few more days won't matter if we do our own investigation. So there's just simple 5 reasons why a person wouldn't report. So we're going to look at the legal standard. The legal standard in most cases is reasonable cause to suspect or reasonable belief. That's the legal standard. It's not like this person told me directly and now I've got to do something with it. It is higher than that. Reasonable suspicion does not require certainty that child abuse or neglect has occurred. Okay? So you don't have to have proof. You have to have reasonable cause, okay, to believe that this is what happened. And so then the penalties for not reporting. So you can see here, this is just a few, because I had a lot of this in the early stages, but in 2008 in Phoenix, a couple was in the ministry, not in our church. This situation happened where the dad had done something with the daughter. She was 17. They counseled her to forgive her dad. They counseled him to stop. She moved out of the home, and life went on. I'm so sorry that I keep hitting that. Life went on. And then 3 years later, dad was arrested. He had now molested the younger daughter at home. And so the minister and wife, evangelist and women's ministry leader, was arrested for failure to report, saying that if you had reported this incident to the police, then they would have protected this younger daughter from what had happened. So you can see that it can range from a misdemeanor to a felony, depending on what state you are and depending on the circumstances. And so a lot of these other things, and if anybody of you have followed the Southern Baptist Convention this year, the Southern Baptist Convention came out with a paper, and they talked about the thousands of ministers who were on the list, who they had moved from place to place, similar to the Catholic Church, who had molested or abused or raped people in their ministries. So that's why it's super important for us to be watchful, to watch the signs, to know the signs, to get knowledgeable about what are the signs of our abuse and of what can happen. Reporting is loving and necessary despite the laws. Even if the law says you don't have to report, reporting is loving. Loving the person, loving the kid. One of the things is from one of these articles, it says, I can never forget the night I sat with a group of incest offenders in treatment, most of whom were active Christians, and listened to each one recount going to their pastor after arrest and confessing, and each one sent home with a prayer and forgiven. They said, please don't forgive us so quickly. It was the worst thing our pastors did because it meant we could continue to avoid responsibility. Their witness is a powerful reminder to clergy of the limits of our resources and the breadth of our responsibility to protect children. So, like I said, this isn't a scare tactic, but we do have to be wise. It talks about, in that. So look at this. Nice young woman, right? Nice looking lady. Good looking young man. Here you get a little bit rougher. A little bit. Obviously, you're starting to tell these are mug shots here. And they prey upon the flock. This was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They called them deep cover operators. Some hide in plain sight, others spend years grooming coworkers, church members, friends, even parents of their victims. So they were arrested and charged in Tulsa. And a few of them let themselves believe that they don't actually harm children. Deceiving themselves is as important to them as deceiving you. The world has created a new word for pedophile. Anybody heard the new word for pedophile? It's called MAPS, minor attracted person, because that doesn't sound as bad as a pedophile. And so, I just recommend that you get knowledgeable. I consider church people easy to fool. They have a trust that comes from being Christians. They tend to be better folks all around and seem to want to believe the good that exists in people, which it is. That's true. It's a great part of what we are and who we are that we do. But in order to be knowledgeable, we have to be trained. Okay, so knowing what predator training looks like for you and also for your congregation. You know, in some sense, having a kid in a classroom is not my biggest concern about their safety, because pretty much we check them in, we check them out, their parents, no, we've got 2 people in every room, etc. My bigger concern is when we get in house churches. And you have the house church leader say, oh, all the kids are going down to the basement. And they're all going to play, but they don't have any supervision. And then you have 2 teenagers who are male and female attracted to one another, and now they're in the closet. And, then you find out later, and now you've destroyed 2 families because of the way that we're too trusting in those settings. So there's over 747,000 registered sex offenders in the US, and there's 100,000 sexual offenders who fail to report yearly. So 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 4 boys will be sexually assaulted by the time they are 18. And so 40% of the offenders target young children or juveniles themselves. So juveniles targeting juveniles. And only 3% sexual offenders have a chance of getting caught. But over 80% of them know their abusers. So that's where, you have the profiles of predators, of someone who's a power predator, someone who's a pervasive predator. But then you can follow. And this will all be online, so you can grab all of this. But this kind of tells you how it works. They infiltrate, they gain your trust, we drop our guard, they gain access to the children. They risky behaviors, all of this kind of stuff, and then the abuse occurs. Sometimes abuse doesn't happen for years because they've groomed them literally for years. And the other thing is, don't think this doesn't happen in the ICOC, okay? Please don't think that we're above any of that. I can tell you from my experience and my history, this has happened in our fellowship. A lot of the stories I tell you are things that are in the news and stuff, but I have just as many stories that I could tell you that are absolutely in our fellowship, were not reported, and terrible things have happened to some of these kids. So the keys to children's ministry security, of course we know, never leave a child alone. Don't make exceptions no matter how well you know the parent. Decrease isolation, increase accountability. Don't be afraid to say no. You're responsible for the child's safety, no one else's. So you've got, and the teachers, of course, but pretty much we're there for the kids. Keep good records of attendance, making sure that you have what be able to do the backstory, have the backstory. Don't allow children to be unattended. And don't allow any physical contact with the children, especially like sitting on your lap during story time, and using caution even with your own children. So I'm the scare tactic, Melissa's the encourager. She's gonna come up, she's gonna give you all the, the things about being a partnership, but please partner with your board. Please partner with your leadership team. Please partner with your evangelists to be able to at least look at some of these things and go over a period of time. So I want to introduce Melissa, and I think she'll tell you a little bit about herself. Melissa's from North River, Georgia, North River Church. She is an amazing children's ministry resource. Her church in North River has over 125 kids every week in children's ministry. And so I am just so excited because she is partnered with us to be able to just bring a new excitement and level to children's ministry. And I just know that I've learned so much from her, and I'm just excited that she's going to be able to share all of this with you.
Okay, so that was a lot. I know we're all kind of like, that's the scariest thing we do, right? Is to protect our kids. I want to kind of take a hard transition, and I want to try to inspire you to think about raising resilient kids. What's it going to take? How do we partner with church leadership and children's ministry leadership to really transition our children's ministries into a space where we are raising kids who are incredibly resilient. Just a little bit real quickly about me. I was baptized at 13 years old in the Boston church. And so I'm coming up on 29 years as a disciple, September 18th. I was married 18 years ago. My husband, Billy, and I have 3 kids, 4, 8, and 12, 2 boys and a girl. I did ministry work I worked with the teen ministry, I led in campus ministry, now I'm doing children's ministry. I also did my undergraduate degree at Rutgers in New Jersey, so I was in that church there, and then got my master's in education in Georgia. So I've spent the last, I've really spent a lot of my life in several different congregations in several different states, really thinking about and caring a lot about children. And so, for me, I was hired part-time 8 years ago by the North River Church of Christ and was able to be mentored by Lois Schmidt, who's now in Gainesville. She was full-time and I was her assistant. And I had little ones, I still have a little one, but, and was just kind of alongside her, learning a lot and being mentored by her. I've also been mentored by one of our main evangelists, Jeff Hickman, and then now one of the elders of the church mentors me, John Haynes, and then one of our elders' wives, Pam Dakota, has been mentoring me. So I just kind of want to communicate how much has been poured into my role and who I am, and I just am incredibly grateful for that. And I know that's not the same in all of our cities, right? Sometimes we feel like we're kind of doing this by ourselves. And I think that's a mistake, and I hope I can convince you of that today. I know for me, I spent 12 years in education and learning about development and about milestones and things like that. And it really does help to have some education background. But even just a great-hearted disciple can do amazing things in children's ministry. My heart today and just in general is to try to help us communicate how important a resilient faith is for our kids. I know for me, it's been vital to my ability to stay faithful this long, being resilient, right? Not just the pandemic, but just maintaining a life of faith through many, many years. So that's a little bit about me. I wanted to read a couple statistics. Prior to COVID-19, the CDC data found that 1 in 5 children had a mental disorder. Only 20% of those children were receiving care from a mental health provider. So completely amid a massive shortage of children's mental health resources, right? However, in March of 2020 to October of 2020, mental health-related emergency room department visits increased 25%. This isn't just an increase in mental health. This is children whose mental health challenges sent them to the emergency room. 5 to 17 years old, 5 to 11 years old. We are seeing a massive shift in our kids' mental health strength and ability. I know for me personally, just sort of thinking about, what do we do? How do we approach this? I've done a lot of research and looking into what are different states doing. And, a lot of states are addressing this through schools. They are utilizing what the school's resources that are already in place. I know you probably can't see it from where you're seated, but several different states have implemented strategies to try to help intervene, right? They're like, we've got to fix this. The pandemic has made things significantly worse for children. And so this report from the American Academy of Pediatrics basically is addressing kind of, we got to fix this. But I think as disciples, we know that the schools alone are not going to be able to fix this. It's going to take a lot more than that. I know for me, just kind of anecdotally with my children, one of my kids, I'm going to try not to be too specific, has had a very surprising amount of things occur just even in this school year alone. One example would be he's had 4 different boys ask him to be their boyfriend. 4. He's had kids vaping in the middle of music class at his school. We've got guidance counselors teaching lessons on sexuality and identity. And this is in 5th grade, just to clarify. the things that our kids are being exposed to now are things that we were exposed to in high school and college. I didn't even learn about pornography until I was in late high school. My son was shown pornography at 5 years old on a school bus on a cell phone. The world is changing, and whether you're in Africa or France or New Jersey, the world is changing. And we as a church really need to get involved and be super intentional about how we're intervening. Even just personally at North River, the children who were born in the pandemic, so about 2.5 and under, are coming to us in a state of crisis. They have extended crying. They're emotionally, extended. They're totally overwhelmed by their emotions. They have separation anxiety, fear, hypersensitivity, just a lot of crying with these kids. And I don't know if that's something you're seeing in your churches, but it's something that we're taking really seriously, because a lot of parents, if they get called out of church enough, they don't want to come back, which Bob alluded to earlier. Even our older kids, a lot of them have really weak relationships at church because they haven't been consistent. They don't know some of their peers. They haven't really had the opportunity to connect with them through the pandemic. So I think my question is, with the digital generation being defined digitally and defiled, how can we combat this? What can we as a church do to turn the tide? And I believe that's combating sin in a more intentional way than we've ever done before. Digital habits define and defile this generation. And they need a faith that can withstand our culture and our church's weaknesses. If we look at the story of Daniel, he was incredibly resilient. And I think he's a great example for a lot of us when we think about children's ministry as somebody who refused to be defiled. But if you look just in 8 through 9 of Daniel 1, you can kind of just read along. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now, God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. So he kind of could sense that his culture wasn't going in the right direction. And he chose to step outside of that culture and do something difficult that he knew would build his faith. When Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he gets down on his knees and prays, giving thanks to God, just as he had done before. And then it says in verse 16, later on as the story progresses, we know sort of what's happening there. And if you don't remember it, go back and read it. But the king gives the order, they bring Daniel in, they throw him into the lion's den, right? And what does the king say? May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. You see, Daniel refused to be defiled, had a habit of devotion, and was consistent in his faith. These are the attributes that our kids need to make it through this world. As we continue on with the story of Daniel, as we know, God shuts the mouths of the lions, right? But what does Daniel do? He gives the glory to God immediately. My God sent his angel. He shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor I have ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. It's like Daniel is able to be triumphant through God's power and gives God all the glory. I mean, what an amazing person. But even as we tell that story, do we talk more about Daniel or do we talk more about God? And we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. But I think Daniel's a great example of resiliency, of a faith that goes much deeper. I think one thing that helps as we talk about resiliency is to kind of think about what are some things in the past that have been stumbling blocks for us in children's ministry? What's hurt us? What have been some patterns and things that we as churches have done that potentially have made things worse and not better? So I'm going to go over kind of some common problems plaguing children's ministries, both, domestically and internationally. And I just want to invite you to kind of notate what are some of the things in your children's ministry that you're seeing, and maybe where could God be exposing weak points? The first thing I kind of just alluded to is reducing who God is. We tell stories in a way where the men in the Bible or the women were the hero and not God himself. And I think what this does is it instills an attitude of behavioral modification in our kids instead of just an excitement about who God the Father is. And so as we teach the Bible and as we instruct kids, I think we need to be very careful that we keep God the hero of the story. Even when we talk about David and Goliath, right? Don't we teach David had a heart after God and he got those stones and he knocked down Goliath. We need to have a heart like David, right? No. God is the hero of that story. Nothing is too big for God. Goliath wasn't too scary to God. That's a big shift in the way we instruct our kids. And so in some children's ministries, I've seen that where we kind of dumb it down too much. And the kids walk away thinking, I need to behave like David. And that does not last into adulthood. That type of faith, it can't be sustained. Men are not the hero. God is the hero. And as we break that down for kids, they are drawn to who God is and not just a bunch of rules and regulations. We talk about scaffolding a lot in education. Those of you who have exposure to education know what I'm talking about, but for those who don't, a scaffold, when I lived in New York City, you'd walk down the street and you'd be in these little scaffolds, right, that would be all around you, and you'd feel like, gosh, am I safe even? But they would build up alongside as they would renovate and fix buildings, and really a scaffold is kind of what you create to have a strong foundation moving forward. You use a scaffold, you create structures to run alongside something that's really significant. I think in some of our churches, we've had weak scaffolding. We kind of give the kids something good here, give the kids something good there. Maybe we don't have a great teacher right now. There's not an intentional approach to how we structure our program. And to be honest with you, having a program where we've got weak scaffolding, we've reduced God to a bunch of rules and regulations, it makes a big difference in what our kids are experiencing on a regular basis, and it affects their faith into adolescence. I think in some situations, we've got poor instruction, and in some situations, we've got boring classes. I want to ask you, when was the last time you sat in a children's ministry class? I know a lot of us are directors or staff leaders. How often do you sit in on a class, on the floor, and really think about it the way the kids are receiving it? Is it engaging? Sometimes when our ministries are strictly volunteer-based, right, we don't have the resources to go sit in on a class. Sometimes we don't have the time to really plan and organize a lesson because it's strictly volunteer-based. I think in some situations we have great intentions, but the lessons themselves are falling flat because nobody really has the time to put into making it awesome. I think one of the things that leads to boredom is having a sage on the stage model. This is something they talk about in education as well. When I was growing up, right, I would sit in class, the teacher would be at the front of the room, sort of a pulpit style education, and they would be the expert and they would download that information into me and I would take a test and I would, right, that's kind of how education has been. We're gonna talk about in a minute another option, but think about why this model doesn't work now. Kids can pull up most of what teachers can say on their phones. So there is a real gap there between wanting a teacher at the front of the room to teach the whole lesson, teacher, you're the expert, I'm just learning, and do they retain that way? And we're going to talk more about that too. I've been spying on other churches for a long time. I'm a member at 3 different churches in town because I like to go in and spy on them. I like to see what are they doing, what works. I don't agree with them doctrinally, let's just make that clear. But in many cases, these other churches are investing so much into these kids. Think about the Jews. They, from a very young age, start teaching kids the Torah. They have a bar mitzvah. Cultures are pouring into their children. Even, the Baptist church down the street, those kids are praying Jesus into their heart when they're 6 years old. They're involved, and the churches are investing in that. And so we as a church kind of have to figure out, how do we fix that? Another big problem is teacher burnout. We've got teachers that are phenomenal, but they do it back to back and they're exhausted. They're exhausted because they're the sage on the stage with all the expectation pouring into them. They get tired. They want to do something different. You may not see them for a couple of years and now you've lost them as a teacher. So teacher burnout is a big problem. And talking more about the sage on the stage, I know for me, I've seen in education that there's been a huge shift away from this. This is kind of what school looked like when I was a kid. The teacher's at the front of the room, as I mentioned, and we're expected to memorize what they taught us, right? Education doesn't look like this anymore. If you go into kindergarten classrooms, third grade classrooms, I've done this. I go in as a room mom, right, with my kids. Kids are on bouncy balls. Kids have fidget spinners. Kids are in centers. Why should school be more engaging than church? Why should school be innovating and creating ways to engage our kids? But we're not. We're kind of stuck in a sage on the stage model. Teacher preps for 2 days. They come in, maybe they remember what they're doing, maybe they don't. Maybe they have their supplies, maybe they don't. They spit out a lesson. Maybe they're not a trained educator, it falls flat. Sometimes the experience that the kids are getting isn't great. And I think sometimes we're afraid to admit that, right? Because we're just busy trying to staff those classes, and we don't want to admit that the quality isn't very good. But I want to inspire you to think about that. How can we get better quality classes? And hopefully we'll find some things like that. I wanted to give you another potential problem, is that we view children's ministry as a babysitting place, right? We just want to keep the kids safe. I mean, Susan gave us a lot of instruction on just keeping those kids safe. And it might take all your resources currently just to keep those kids safe. But we can do more than that. We can do more than babysitting. And the other churches are. So let's figure out how to do that. One of the examples that I read about recently was, you could go to Home Depot and stand in the paint aisle, right? You look at the paint. You might even memorize the names of the paint. You might even test some of them. You might even visit that paint every week and just, more about Sherwin-Williams than anybody else, okay? But does that make you a painter? It doesn't. It makes you a person who knows a lot about paint, but not a painter. I think sometimes we expect that if kids attend church, they'll become disciples. Well, that's not true. Just exposure to church and having church attendance does not make disciples. And I think sometimes we think we're winning just because people are showing up. And that's a bare minimum expectation. We can do so much more. We can do so much better for our kids. I like to think about our children's ministry as like a diving board. We're the ones to give this springboard, right? The pool is their home life. The kids have a space to jump off and think and wonder and question, and they land in the pool that is their home. But if we're not stimulating and asking big questions and keeping things exciting, what have we stimulated to happen at home? It's not enough just to place all the ownership on what happens at home. We've got families that are weaker than ever. Families who have not come back to church since the beginning of the pandemic. Parents who are overwhelmed. Parents who are homeschooling. I'm homeschooling. It's a lot. It's tiring. So expecting, parents should raise their kids and parents need to develop their faith. That's a lot to put on families. What can we as a church do to partner with our families at a new level in a more intense and intentional approach that makes a difference? And I think creating an awesome children's ministry as a great diving board sets those kids to jump right up into that pool. Churches and Christians are busier than ever. With large communities outside of church, they've got their sports team and the travel team, which takes up their whole life. They've got social media connections. They've got neighborhood parties, right? Families are busy. They have a lot going on. And so we've got to kind of recognize that a rarely engaged church life is not going to help these kids withstand the culture. It's not going to help them reject the defiling that's happening around them. They need more from us. A rarely engaged church community with a babysitting style ministry for its children isn't enough to resist our culture. Our culture is very strong. These kids are addicted to gaming. They're addicted to Snapchat. They're addicted to TikTok. And if we're not careful, we will lose them to that culture before they ever get to our middle school ministry. We can't start paying attention to kids when they turn 13. We have to start when they are little. 3, 4, 5 years old. Do you love church? Why not? Tell me what you don't like about it and let's fix it. I think sometimes we ask the kids small questions that are too easy. These are some good examples of some big questions. How should I live? How does God feel about me? What makes me unique? Am I truly loved? Do my choices matter? What makes me special? Am I made for something? How can I make a difference? These are the searchings and the wanderings of their hearts. If you pull off the Minecraft, right? That's what's underneath there. If you can push away the TikTok dances, that's what's underneath that. But if we as a children's ministry aren't setting our kids up with big questions, where do they go to get these answers? Screens, right? The screens are babysitters, entertainment, counselors, identity validators, gender identity validators, sex educators, and it's all done in privacy. So they don't have to be vulnerable and ask us. So they're getting these questions answered somewhere. Why not in our children's ministry? Why not? But if we don't ask the questions, then they're not thinking about the answers and asking their parents. So there's a diving board approach where we start off something that they land into. Screens are becoming our kids' disciplers unless we step in and take on that role. Okay, so let's do better. Let's do better, right? How do we do better? How do we move forward? Well, there's only one way to walk away from weak instruction, boring lessons, babysitting models, an unstimulating church community. We have to partner as church leadership and children's ministry to build a faith community where our kids are feeling engaged and stimulated to trust God and to walk with Jesus. Then they can go home and investigate these faith-filled conversations. So this is another alternative to the sage on the stage, the guide by the side. This is what a lot of our classrooms look like now. Teachers spend a lot less time up front and a lot more time on the floor with the kids. And if you're in the classrooms, you see that, right? You see teachers who are super engaged. And maybe it's centers. You know, maybe you've got 2 or 3 teachers engaged and the kids are rotating. But we can move forward. We can focus on some intentional resources and create classes that look a lot more like this. Research suggests that kids learn and retain a lot more that they've learned through play and relationally than what they're just told auditorily. You know, in education, we talk about differentiation, which is basically just teaching to every type of child. There are kids who learn great auditorily. They would get a lot from me standing here right now, right? But there are kids who literally haven't heard a word I've said because they're not auditory learners. But if our instruction is differentiating, we've got kinesthetic options, we've got visual options, they're gonna pick something up. But if we just have a sage on the stage model, half of our class may not be getting anything from it. So varying kind of what we do. When kids are engaged in a fun, biblically strong class, they will retain that information and learn to build trust in God. Because church is fun. They're looking forward to going there, right? Okay, so how do we do better? I think it's good to really get intentional about making your children's ministry the best it can possibly be. Sometimes it's hard to know where to start, you know, especially if you're getting bogged down in just getting your group legal and safe. So I want to give you a whole bunch of options on how to do things better, and then we're going to transition into talking about how to create goals for your specific ministry. Okay, so a vision for how a children's ministry could be. How could it be better? Well, first of all, this ministry would be incredibly intimate with Jesus. We would be teaching children to walk with him. Jesus-centered, culture-countering, living differently than our go-with-the-flow culture. You know, I think about in 1 Peter 1 where it talks about holy, set-apart living. That's intimacy with Jesus. And then, you know, as the children are learning who he is, it doesn't feel so rote, right? It feels natural. It feels authentic. A great children's ministry would have an intentional partnership, both with your children's ministry leadership and your church staff. I've shared before that I was mentored by lots of people, and I'm still being poured into by so many amazing leaders in our church. I get with, you know, elder's wife every week. You know, an elder once a month we get together. I get with the administrative team once a month. I get with the family ministry team once a month. And granted, I'm a paid staff. I know a lot of people don't have that advantage, but the intentionality is there. And even if you're not in a big church or you don't have the financial ability to work full time, you can become more intentional about the partnerships that you have. One of my favorite passages is in 2 Kings chapter 2, where Elijah and Elisha, the whole succession is happening, right? And what does he say? How can I help you? What do you need from me? And if you're in senior leadership in your church, or if you're watching at home and you're in senior leadership at church, that's the question you ask your children's ministry leader. What do you need from us to make this great? How can I help you? And if you're a children's ministry leader, ask them, how can I help you make our children's ministry great, evangelist or elder? How can I help you make this awesome? The partnership. I think another key is having an empowered children's ministry staff. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. If you can afford this, your church should be doing this. If you can find a way to make it work, and maybe it's real basic. Maybe you tap shoulders to provide babysitting for a mom for 10 hours a month to sit and dream about this. Maybe you as a team provide childcare so that somebody can dedicate and be empowered to start dreaming and thinking and planning. Maybe you're in a situation where you're in a bigger church and a lot of money is being funneled into youth and family. Some of that might need to be redirected into children's ministry, because if we don't catch them in children's ministry, how are we going to expect to hold on to them as they're middle and high schoolers? In many situations, the kids have lost interest already. And then we're like, well, gosh, I don't know why they're not interested at 15, 16. Well, they weren't interested at 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So you've got to be willing to kind of put some money into the effort and then empower that leadership to make a difference. I think having great opportunities for community for your kids, safe opportunities for them to have fellowship. Maybe it's just let's all show up at the park, everyone who has first graders. That's free. It doesn't take that much work, but it's creating a social network that's different from, Snapchat. Something in person that creates community. I think the children's ministry has a really strong connected team. The kids are able to really sense that the church leadership and their teachers are all on the same page. The family ministry, the youth and family ministry, the children's ministry are working together. That's been one of my favorite things. The Schaffs lead youth and family at North River, and we get together every month. And we talk about, what kind of events do you have? How can I come to your events? Do you want to come to mine? Let's support each other. Let's make this a family focus. And I know a lot of churches are doing a next-gen team, and that's the exact kind of heart where we need to all kind of get on the same page. Obviously, parent involvement would be a key feature in doing better moving forward. Parents are some of our best teachers because they are invested already. But if we burned them out because we expected them to be the sage on the stage all the time with very little support, then sometimes we don't get their buy-in because they're exhausted. Fun, engaging curriculum. We want every kid to leave our ministry saying, that was fun. I had fun today. And maybe the whole thing isn't engaging. We're not talking about a horse and pony show, right? But it's engaging, and I could do a whole class on curriculum, but honestly, curriculum that isn't fun is not probably going to be, you probably won't be the one to know if it's fun or not. You need to ask the kids. Is it fun? Are you enjoying it? Things that were created 20 years ago are probably not fun because they don't take into account differentiation, differentiated learning styles. So if something was built 20 or even 40 years ago, it's probably no longer fun to a kid today. So being humble and saying to your 7-year-olds, did you guys have fun today? And then hearing why they didn't. Did they feel like they were in trouble the whole time? Was the lesson kind of boring? Have they heard that same story every year for the last 6 years? Let's have engaging curriculum. And honestly, you can partner with a larger church. If you're a small church, we share our login codes for curriculum with several smaller churches. That you can be creative when it comes to curriculum. If you don't have a budget for curriculum, reach out. There's ways to make it happen. Fun events. My goal at North River is to do a really fun event every other month. We've done father-daughter dance, or you can even call it Sweethearts Ball. That way it can be mother-son, father-daughter, grandma-grandpa, Sweethearts Ball. We've done an Easter egg hunt. We do a back-to-school party. We do trunk or treat. We do things that are strictly focused on engaging our kids and engaging our community, a space where people feel safe and can have a great time. A supervising team. I know a lot of churches have their one children's ministry person and then a bunch of teachers. that model probably isn't going to work. Those teachers get burned out and your leader gets burned out. You need to raise up supervisors who work underneath your children's ministry leader to kind of implement and help direct some of the efforts towards quality instruction. You know, my supervisors, they sit in on classes on a regular basis, so do I, and give the teachers suggestions on how to make it more fun and how to, you know, work with this difficult, you know, situation, or sometimes a whole class will get kind of a funky, you know, this whole class is wild. You know, getting supervisors involved and training them to kind of make a big difference. I also have utilized a children's ministry leadership group team. If you don't have one, start thinking about that. Like, how could we broaden the people who are bought in to making a difference in children's ministry? Sometimes it's educators, sometimes it's ministry staff. You know, I've tapped some of the elders' wives and asked them to serve on the children's ministry leadership group. And maybe we just do a Zoom call once a month, and maybe I reach out and ask for advice and input and help. But having a leadership group is a great way to do it better. Incorporation, right? So this is just thinking about, how do I incorporate the kids into what we do as a big church? You know, could a kid do a welcome? Yeah. Could a kid be a part singer? Sure could. Could a kid do a prayer? Could a kid lead a song? Now, is it going to be the best song you've ever heard? Maybe not. Okay, let's be honest, right? But it's still incorporating them into the church life where they see other kids that look like them are important to their church leadership and important to God. Decision making, right? If you're not currently involved in decision making at your church and you do children's ministry, that needs to change. Decision making circles need to have an advocate for children. They need to have somebody in there who says, wait a minute, you know, the kids are studying this. Could we consider aligning? Or the kids haven't had such and such in a certain amount of time. You know, how could we incorporate children's ministry leaders into the decision making that's going on? I think kid-on-kid contact, right? Kids serving other kids. That would be kind of a dream for our kids to not just have a lot themselves, but to turn around and serve their community. Having awesome communication. I mean, some of our children's ministries, you know, if you walked into church, you wouldn't know where to go or when things are or how they're happening. Parents haven't heard from the children's ministry leader in a few months. You know, things like that break down your communication and make it a lot harder. Excellent training. You know, a lot of the things that Susan covered today, I cover with all my teachers. I train them all in predator training. I train them all in stuff like that so that the training they receive is enough for them not to get burnt out. Involvement from your elders and your evangelists. If you don't have that now, find ways to do that. Pull them in. Ask for their help. Ask for their support. Ask for their guidance. We need people who are making decisions about our congregations to have a child advocate in the room. And sometimes having an elder or an evangelist really pulled in on and aware of what's going on makes a huge difference. I know for me, Tom Brown has been our primary evangelist for years. Tom has me report every week in staff. How is children's ministry going? What are our needs? What are our challenges? What events do I have coming up? How many kids were in attendance on Sunday? Am I missing certain families? Do I have certain concerns? What do I need? That is all done at our staff level. So really having an evangelist and an elder involved, engaging worship for the kids. You know, there was a time where the kids would come to church and not sing at all. They'd get checked in, they'd have a lesson, they'd play, they'd eat a snack, they'd do a craft, and they never sang a single song. And it doesn't instill a desire for worship in kids. So again, I know I'm throwing at you a ton of like major ideals, but start latching on to some of those. Start thinking about, what does that look like? What would that look like in our space? Mentorship. I've already shared about how a lot's being poured into me, but I'm pouring into a lot. I'm pouring into those college students who are majoring in education. I'm pouring into them. Come be a supervisor. You care about kids? Great. Let me mentor you. Let me have you in my home. How can I love up on you? That makes a big difference because then they turn around and mentor the teachers, right? So there's a whole network of mentorship that can be accessed. So, okay, maybe you've heard all of that and you're going, okay, gosh, that's not doable for us. Or maybe you're going, okay, we've got all that, we're good. What's next? I want to give you some goals. And thinking about, as you're building your children's ministries, what are some things that you could latch onto right now and communicate with your elder and evangelist? I really want to see us grow in this. Okay, let's go through a few of these. Knowing God's word, right? The kids, they need to know God's word. They need to be memorizing scripture. One of the great resources that I've started using is Dwell. Dwell is $12 a month. They send you a tattoo of a memory verse. They send you a devotional to do with your kids, and your whole family learns a memory verse. It's real simple. It's not that expensive. It's helped our kids memorize scripture. A powerful walk with God, not a bunch of rules that are behavior focused and lists, right? But an actual walk with God. The children feeling like the church is their home, that they see other kids involved in the services. They see parents involved in their lives. Not planting seeds of moralism in our kids, but really kind of fostering an individual walk with God. Really engaging lessons with strong curriculum. This intentional approach that we've already kind of talked about. You know, remember, we're preparing our kids to stand up for their faith, their values, and their identities in Jesus and in God. And so we've got a big task since we're up against a massive satanic force. And we have to be intentional early on about what our approach is going to be as a church. Having a relational progression for our kids, not just pouring religious information into them, but really talking about, you know, God the hero, not a bunch of behavior and rules and lists, but really getting to know God for themselves, to sense how he can be trusted. Growing trust, developing long-term healthy faith because they've grown their trust in God. Rejecting sin management. Sometimes that's what we focus on with our kids. Obey, do the right thing, have a good attitude, have a happy heart, right? Sin management. We need to reject that in children's ministry. We don't want our kids to walk around like, I have a list of everything I'm supposed to be doing, and if not, I get in trouble. That's not a faith that will withstand our culture. That's little robots who follow lists, and then they get sick of it when they turn about 12 and 13 years old and say, forget this, I'm done. Jesus did not come to give us a bunch of lists to follow. He came to walk with us, to sacrifice for us, to love us. And that's what we want for our children. You know, children's ministry should be like a suitcase. We provide this awesome suitcase. We don't pack it for them. We don't tell them exactly how the suitcase has to go. We gift them the suitcase, and we show them our suitcase. And we show them how we do it. We show them how we hold it and how we manage it. But it's their job to learn how to carry their own suitcase. Otherwise, they can't manage their own faith as they become adolescents, because we've told them too much about what they have to do and how they have to be, that they don't have a natural, authentic faith. So give them a suitcase, but don't pack it for them. Why do we need a partnership with our leadership? Because there's no other way. You can't do this by yourself, guys. If you're a children's ministry leader in this room, or you're watching from home, you can't do this alone. You will burn out, you will quit, we will not see you at the next summit, okay? It is too hard. We need a team. We need a leadership community that is all focused on intervening and snatching these kids out of Satan's grasp. He is waging war on childhood, drastically. We have to step in and intervene wherever we can. How do we do it? Well, we've talked about a lot of that today. Start small. Create a family ministry team. You know, start meeting with your youth and family leader once a month. Start meeting with, you know, people in other churches who do children's ministry. Find a way to get some kind of a stipend, some kind of a budget. When your church has a little bit of money invested, it's amazing how much things improve. Maybe you're just, like I said, reimbursing somebody's babysitting. That alone allows somebody to sit down and think and plan and dream and put something together. Who's a great candidate for a position like this? If you're in the room, you're probably a great candidate. If you're watching at home and you lead a church, you might have someone in your church, maybe an educator, maybe a parent, maybe somebody who's just got an incredible passion. Appoint them a children's minister. Help them to develop, support them, mentor them. You know, we can't do this by ourselves, but if we work together, our kids get to enjoy this leadership partnership that's supporting our families and raising resilient kids in a faith culture that can withstand anything. I wanted to share with you one last thing. We as a team, there's quite a few of us, children's ministers around the country, who get together and talk and plan classes and things like this. And I know we're kind of drinking from the water hose. We're giving you a whole lot right now. I know you're probably in like a vegetative state. But, let this be the beginning of something, right? Not just a place to like, oh my gosh, we have so much to do. Really try to start dreaming and thinking. And those of us that work on this are willing to help you and support you. And we have this is a QR code for our Children's Ministry Global Hub, which is several of us children's ministers have poured into and started building this sort of community for children's ministers. And you can screen this and it'll take you to our website and you can start kind of plugging in and getting support. Maybe you're an international church that has no budget, nobody assigned. That's okay. Some of our big churches have been around for 40 years. They can reach out and help you. And so there's a place on the form where you can ask, I need mentorship, I need money, I need support. And we want to try to create that space where we can all kind of work together. This is the URL. This is my email. I love talking about this. This is my bread and butter. So if you ever want to reach out to me, email me. I talk to children's ministers in every city probably every month. People call me from all over, and I love to talk about this. And I see that as a way that me as a part of a bigger church can help some of our smaller churches. So see us as resources. There's quite a few of us. Susan, Vicki who's in the back, Bridget who's at home, who are doing children's ministry and are pouring into it, and we want to help you. So, okay, next steps. We've already said don't get overwhelmed. Pick one or two things. We do have a couple minutes left that we wanted to give you an opportunity if there are questions, if there are specific thoughts or things you're going, oh, I don't know, or, feel free to raise your hand and share, and we will repeat what you say in the microphone so that those at home get the opportunity to benefit. But does anybody have any questions, thoughts, feedback, responses, anything? April? Just give her microphone.
Yeah, a couple of things. I'll ask one and wait for my turn to come back around. But as far as one of the things I've heard recently about for policies is that couples, we have a two-person rule.
Yeah.
It always has to be two persons with a child, and I've heard couples kind of don't fit that rule, and that's the first time I heard it like a couple of months ago, and I'm like, what?
Yes.
That's half what am I gonna do?
So I'm gonna repeat that in case you didn't hear. Couples serving together as a team in a classroom. In many states, including Georgia, married partners are not required by law to testify against one another. So if a parent is in a room and their spouse is in the room and something happens that's not good and they go to court, the spouse has the opportunity to refuse to testify. And so because of that, they don't really count as two individuals because they're married, they're one. The way I've gotten around that, or I've worked with that at North River, is I've had a third person in the room where you can, and sometimes you say, if you guys are dead set on teaching together, can you recruit your third? Can you help me find a third for your room? Or I created a form that says that if there were to be an accusation, they would testify against their spouse. Not many people want to do that, but at least you have it in writing that you're covered if something really negative were to happen. The other thing I've done is I've asked the couple to consider, what if one of you teaches on the rotation, I screen the other one, and you rotate in, like maybe they want to be with their kid kind of thing. One of you teaches, and then the other one, teaches every other week or something like that, where we've screened them both, but only one's on the roster, so to speak. That's another way that you can work with that. But you're right, it is tricky to have two individuals who can't really testify against one another serve in that way. And we also were told, I think 6 months ago, that we needed to try to figure a way to work that out. So I can share my form with you if you want to use it, or those are other approaches. Do you want to add anything to that? You did great. Any other thoughts or questions, feedback, concerns? In the back. Hi.
Thank you. Before the pandemic, we have a great children's ministry. After the pandemic, it's been a challenge to raise up again. What we did a virtual ministry in children throughout the whole pandemic. They get used, the same kids that always connect are the kids that are coming to church right now. Mm-hmm. But we lost like half of them. So it's been a challenge. My question is, when you do training to your teachers, could you include us so we could be part of it if you do it in a virtual way? I live in Puerto Rico.
Sure, that's easy. We can zoom you in anytime.
That would be amazing because we have been blessed to have ministries, leader ministries that they always pay attention to the children's ministry.
That's great.
And the parents, they always serve in one of the roster in the children's ministry because that's one rule that we have. There were a time that the parents, they didn't want even to bring the children.
Yeah.
So we didn't ask them to be teachers.
Yeah.
But we did because we didn't have enough people. So
Yeah.
we said, at least 3 months you have to give because these are your children.
That's right.
I have been in the children's ministry more than 25 years.
That's great.
And because of that, I became a teacher.
Love it.
So I would love if we could be part of one of your trainings, things like that, where I could come with the group of coordinators of the children's ministry.
Absolutely. And I know Susan and I, we share our presentations back and forth. I'll update something and send it her way, and she'll do the same, or Vicki. We all kind of work as a team. And so maybe one day we'll get you to a point where you do your own teacher training and you love it and you're excited and you share our presentation and you feel like you're doing great. But I think you bring up a really important point, which is we have a lot of families who have not yet come back from the pandemic. And I think one of the things that I've done is I've tried to schedule some super fun outdoor things that happen right after church, because you'll be surprised how many of them feel fine going to a soccer game, going to a movie theater, going to an outdoor event, but don't feel good about checking their kid into class. But if there's something really fun happening right after church with a bounce house or a water gun war or something, how many of them give it a try? They're like, okay, well, my kids really want to go to the water gun war, so we'll check them into class for the first time, see how that goes, and they find that their fears are calmed by just having the experience of getting back to church.
One thing that is working for us right now is that because they look out for the teams and
Yeah.
they like to be in the teams, and I am also in the teams. So we bring the teams to the children's ministry.
That's great.
We make a schedule, and every Sunday one of the teams come and do a devotion.
That's awesome.
Because the kids want to be with the team,
Yeah.
then they help us.
Yeah, there's not much cooler than a teen when you're in elementary school. Awesome. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah?
Actually, it's from my husband. He's texting questions in for you to field.
Awesome.
So he's being a little bit of a devil's advocate here, which is kind of awesome. He said, of all the things that were suggested to do or implement, if a church cannot implement all those suggestions, what 2 things are the utmost important things to implement or do first?
That's a great question. Do you want to take that one?
I think the 2 things would be making sure they're safe. That would be the one thing, because it can actually, and then making sure that you're building faith. Whatever you're doing, whether it's in the classroom, in an event, that everything we do goes through the lens of helping kids know God.
Yep.
Because that's really all it is. Because if we just have great classrooms and we expect them to just behave, do this, do that, we haven't won their hearts.
That's right.
And God wants their hearts more than anything else. And that's what I tried to do with my grandkids. It was why at the beginning of the pandemic, I started doing kids' church online. I'm still doing kids' church online, even though all of our kids are back. We still have some kids who aren't attending. But so for now 2.5 years, I've done kids' church every week on YouTube. And so then, not everybody sees it, but even if it was for my grandkids, I'm doing it for them too. So even if nobody sees it but my grandkids, I want to build their faith. And they're going to know that of all the things that I had, that God was important to me. God was it. And that I want them to know God.
And that's your legacy in such a great way, Susan. Yeah?
Thank you. Great stuff. I really appreciate that, the faith. My question is, in you getting a lot of mentorship, my wife and I recently started leading children's ministry congregationally and want to be able to build, there's 5 worship centers. We want to be able to not only us connect with the ministers and the elders, but also help the coordinators that are in those worship centers to do the same. And you mentioned it several times, and we would love to begin to do that. Did you initiate a lot of it? How do you go about it? And did some people reach out? Just kind of how to leverage that.
That's a great question. I can share personally, and I know Susan mentors a lot of people as well. I know for me, I did a lot of the initiating because their hearts are there. They just don't realize that I am seeking that I'm longing for that. And so by kind of reaching out and saying, I really want your support, I really need your help, I want us to be a team. Sometimes they'll say like, well, I don't know what I can take on right now, and I'll say, what can you do? What would work with your life schedule? And I'll take whatever I can get. With one of my mentors, Pam, she reached out to me and said, I want to support you. I want to be there for you. How can I show up for you? And we have met every week since on the phone for the last 6 months. And just on her own as an elder's wife felt that it was really important. And so I think asking for it is great, but I think if they don't offer it, doesn't mean they're not willing. And sometimes it may not be your evangelist or your elder or their wife. Maybe there's a great deacon who'd be willing to pour in and mentor. Do you have anything?
Yeah, the other thing that kind of goes along with that is just making sure that it's the whole team approach, that it's not just you guys doing it on your own, that you figure out, gather around you this group of people that are like-minded in what you're trying to accomplish. And it doesn't have to be a staff person, but it's always good to get your staff, your board, get people involved.
And there might be a situation too where you're being compensated, but you're not in the weekly staff meetings that are happening, and I would ask for that. Can I please attend the staff meeting that you have every week if you're not already attending? Because that's where a lot of decisions start getting made. And we kind of go, oh, wait a minute, you're forgetting that the kids are, and we can kind of advocate if we're in that room. But if we haven't been invited, ask to be included. And they might say no. They may not get the vision right yet. Maybe they'll let you come once a month. Maybe they'll let you come once a quarter. So even just taking little steps to try to get the mentorship that you need. And also, a lot of us that have been doing this for a while, we're open to mentoring and helping and can be there for you as well.
Hi.
Hey.
This was amazing. Thank you so much.
Good.
So I'm in an interesting situation. I've moved to a church. It's a smaller church. They hadn't had leadership for a long time. Now they do. And also through the pandemic, children's ministry, this September will be the first time we're actually going to start having classes. And I'm helping to kind of form that. So I have two questions for you. One is, what would you recommend? Like, we're going to meet, actually, timing is amazing. We're going to meet as a group, volunteers who are trying to help, like, kickstart in September. What would you say would be a way to really kickstart this that would encourage members that this is new, this is fresh? What would be some of your suggestions for us to do that? Obviously, there's a lot you've given us to implement, but how would you do that?
That's great. Do you want to take it, Susan, or you want me to? I think one thing is that when kids are excited, then their parents get excited. And so I've tried to really, I don't think exploit is the right word, but exploit the fun. I think creating a big kickoff event, even if it's, real simple. Let's all bring our water guns, and we're going to meet at a park, and we're going to have a, water war to kick off, whatever. I think doing something that's super fun, and then at that event, really harnessing what you're going to do next. Maybe you've got QR codes to get everybody re-registered. Maybe you've got some kind of cool flyer for the next service that you're going to have, but kind of doing something that's exciting where the kids are kind of pulling their parents to get back to the habit of going to church. They miss it. And some of them are so little they don't remember, but I think definitely exploit the fun. I think also really thinking through your children's ministry group that you just mentioned, having them really bought in, engaged, ready to rock, and then have them kind of spread that through their contacts, their small groups, their friends. We're starting over. We're really gonna hit the ground running, and really high hope, high energy, excitement because it's sort of contagious, I think. And then I think saying to the families, like, we're coming back better than ever. We're coming back with high expectations for an awesome school year. This past Sunday, I did a back-to-school bash, and we had bounce houses with water and pizza and the whole thing. And the parents paid for their pizza, and they paid, for things like that. But the kids were so excited. They wore their swimsuits under their church clothes. They were ripping off their clothes at the end of class. I mean, they were begging their parents to be a part of it. And so sometimes just working with what you've got going for you will help.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. Here's my other question. It might be a bigger question. So, what you're saying, about the curriculum, old or whatever, and also this whole concept of what I love is what you're saying about they need to learn to love God and not the behavior. I have kids that are adults, and kind of back in my day, a lot of even the parenting classes were have them obey, have them, so I feel like this could be a whole parenting class. But how, are there people such as yourself or other people that are able to influence the overall kind of leadership groups that we have in the ICOC, which I'm sure you've thought about, because I think it's huge. I mean, one of the things that I've seen through my children's generation is there's a lot of kids that maybe became Christians at 13 and they're not coming anymore.
Right.
Because that level of loving God, like you said, how does God feel about you? It was missed.
Yeah.
And it's sad,
Yeah.
So I feel like this is an incredible opportunity, but what do you know? Is there anything, or can you guys do something?
Yeah, are you gonna start?
Yeah. So this is really important. So the things are changing, in our world, in our leadership. And so that's part of, even through the last 4 years, the Youth and Family Service team is talking more and more about this with the tie-in. So here's kind of how it ties in. You have an evangelist service team, you have an elder service team, and you have a youth and family, you have campus, then there's singles, okay? So all of these service teams are trying to work in combination to come up with the changes that we need to see happen. There was a big survey that they did. They were trying to find out of the kids that were in the campus ministry, who stayed faithful, who was converted in the teens, because we're trying to find out exactly that. What were our mistakes? What do we need to learn from? What do we need to change, okay? And so in the perfect world, we'd have already figured this out, but obviously it's not a perfect world. But we are making those changes, and we do have the influence now to be able to influence other service teams. We have some new people. The Lambs are coming on our service team here very shortly. Melissa's going to join our service team. So we have people who understand that things do need to change. However, things go slow. It's a change that has been coming over through the past 4 years. It'll continue. It's going to take us a while to get where we really would like to be with the kids in the program, but know that it is coming and it is there. And we do understand that it has been taught more from a rule perspective than a loving God perspective.
Yeah, and I would just add, personally, sort of anecdotally, I want to do better by my kids. I don't want my kids to grow up with a faith that is unauthentic. And I think there are probably people in your church that feel the way I do. And harnessing those people and saying, let's do better, let's do better, let's do better. I'll tell you a couple quick things that are inspiring. Meredith Ann Miller is, I don't totally agree with her doctrinally, but she's a phenomenal children's pastor out in, I think, California. She's a great Instagram follow. She has incredibly inspiring things. There's a book called, Yeah, Meredith Ann Miller, she's awesome. Again, I don't always agree with some of her teachings, but she's got a great attitude about not just seeds of moralism and behavioral, but really walking with God and falling in love with God and learning how God is seeking us. It's not just seek God, seek God. He's seeking us. He loves us. And we don't walk away from that in adolescence. And so I think that. I also think the book Faith for Exiles, or Return to a Faith for Exiles, has been awesome. Faith for Exiles. Yeah, it has really, really helped me. Actually, several things were inspired from that text. It talks a lot about why people my age are walking away from the church, because they don't want their kids taught a faith that won't last. I also think, inspiring people, as I mentioned before, who do have young kids, like let's as a group commit to doing better. I think you kind of work in that team model. I would also say don't be afraid to push back. When you see teachers or even evangelist leaders communicating in a way that's not what we want for our families, don't be afraid to speak up about it and say, that just didn't sit well with me. I have a great relationship with a lot of the leaders in my church, and I'll, even after a Sunday message, if something really feels off in the way it's being communicated, I share with them my heart as humbly as I possibly can, just how it makes me feel. But I know for me, I've been a disciple 29 years or so. I want my kids to have a different childhood. I don't want them to be exposed to some of the same teachings and principles and shame. And so I want something better. And I'm willing to put some skin in the game. And I think we need more people who are. So inspiring that in our churches. April, did you have another one?
Because I have children that grew up, my 27-year-old and my 24-year-old are now faithful disciples.
That's awesome.
So I recognize, so there is a lot, they grew up with that do the right thing, we had the 3 Ds, and
Disobedience,
yes,
disrespect,
obey
danger.
the first time. So
Yep.
they grew up with that. They're faithful disciples,
That's great.
love their faith. They inspire me. So don't feel like everything was just bad.
That's right.
Is the thing I wanted to say. But as a teacher, because I teach children with special needs, and as a children's ministry leader, I know better, so I do better.
That's right.
And so what I have to do is educate myself so that I can then advocate. So you may not get the whole ICOC, but work within your ministry.
That's a great
and within
point.
your church and advocate. So that's the thing I want to say. But so my other things are policy things. For the mandatory reporting, who reports? If there's a teacher in there, do they come to me and then I report? Or do they have to not even tell me, they just need to go report?
Okay, so on the mandatory, it's state or country driven. So it's not a one-size-fits-all perspective. So if you're in a state that everyone is a mandatory reporter, the teacher has to report because they're the ones, you're second hand. So the teacher would report. If the kid comes to you one-on-one and you're in a mandatory, you are a mandatory reporter because most children's ministry people are mandatory reporters.
Yes.
Okay? In almost all states.
Yep.
Okay, there is some caveat on some of them that if you're paid versus volunteer. But for the most part, if you're serving as a director, most directors are mandatory reporters. So again, the legal standard is, do you have reasonable cause? And the other thing they tell you is we're not there to pronounce judgment.
Right.
We don't decide whether anything happens with it or not. You may never know anything that happens of it. We had a kid at VBS. He came to class and the prompt was, is there ever a time that you didn't feel safe? Okay, so this kid, VBS, knew, never seen him before. He goes, yeah, when my dad tried to kill me. And I was like, I get the phone call, I'm across
Kids are
campus,
honest.
and I'm running, across campus to find out, what's going on, what happened. Well, this kid his dad had lost custody because he had kidnapped him, had held him at knife point, and this kid was just retelling a story from the past.
Gosh.
And so I called, they said, yes, we're already aware of the situation, it's already been taken care of, and thank you for reporting. And so then I told the mother, and she said, yes, they're aware. you know, and so, you know, most people will appreciate. The people who are guilty are not going to appreciate it.
Yeah.
That's
Good.
just, I mean, we've had people leave the church. My husband was threatened with his life over one situation. And so, you know, that the guilty flee, you know, because they're not going to want to get caught.
That's right.
And we just have to be super vigilant and do our homework and know where we stand, because the last thing you want to do is not report something, and then you're held accountable for what you don't report.
I would just add to that too, you know, in my children's ministry, what I do is I tell my children's ministry workers, come and tell me what you're hearing and don't tell me their name so I can give them advice. If it's too complex, then we both have to report, or if I can figure out who it is. But sometimes they need advice on how to do a DFACS report. I did one last month, and honestly, if there's more than one report on the same situation, they cancel each other out. So whichever one is more thorough gets kept, and the other one gets dropped. So having lots of reports isn't a problem. DFACS or Child Protective Services in your state will manage that on their own. The other thing I would recommend is I have a trusted brother in our congregation who works for Child Protective Services, and I will call him, not giving him any names, and report the incident, and he can tell me, yes, that's reportable, no, it's not. So having people pulled in, whether it's an attorney or somebody else to run advice by, I always tell my teachers, don't tell me their name, because then we'll both have to file, and it cancels things out and it makes things complicated. But get advice before they file. You don't want people off filing and you not knowing that that's happened, and then you expose those kids to more trauma. I would also say if you notice yourself, like Susan said, if they tell you, also if you notice bruises, questionable things, kids who haven't bathed, kids who are overly hungry at snack time, that kind of stuff, you need to report it as well. I think each probably ministry is going to want to handle it differently. I want my teachers to come to me, and then I would rather file the report because it's a lot for them. Like I had a teacher recently, he was up all night going back and forth. Should he tell me? And I'm like, you don't need to go through that. Just tell me what happened and I'll take care of it. If you've never filed a DFACS report, it takes half an hour. It's not a big deal. But you might be protecting a child's life. So it's worth kind of getting that extra input. In Georgia, if they tell me and I report, they don't have to. Other states are not that way. If you have any exposure at all, they want dupes. They want duplicate reports. So I think research your state, know exactly what your state requires, and then build something into your system, your policies, that makes it positive that it won't go underreported.
Right.
Sometimes a good-meaning disciple will tell me, like, she seems really lonely. Should I file a DFACS report? Or she seems sad. And it's like, well, no, the state can't do anything about that. So sometimes we keep the state from being even further overburdened, but if you don't have expertise in that, I don't recommend you making that determination.
Right, and the other piece that kind of goes along with it is that's why a board risk management committee is imperative.
Yep.
Because legally they are held responsible, the church is responsible for everything a volunteer does.
That's right.
So you want to have that committee and have those guidelines in place so that you really know what to do in those settings. So then you can decide whether, is it going to be teacher driven? Is it going to be, coordinator driven? And it's very, very clear who's going to be doing what by the risk management committee.
Yep. I think for the sake of time, we want to wrap it up, but I just want to say on behalf of me, thank you. Behalf of all of us that do children's ministry, thank you very much for being willing to love these kids, to do the extra work, to stay up late planning an awesome lesson. Thank you. Thank you for what you do. We love you. We want to hold up your arms and support you, and we will if you reach out. That's a great question. Yeah. I know you're trying to translate. Yes. Absolutely. I think that's a great consideration.
So I think what we can do is we'll take this class and we'll have it translated and put it online.
Yeah. And we'll put it on our hub, so you can
We'll put
find
it on the hub,
We'll put it on the
so-
hub, so you can find it easily.
Give
The
us
QR code,
2 or 3 weeks, and we'll have it translated. Either we'll have it written, captioned,
Put it on the hub.
translated, or we will have somebody dub it.
Also, when you were talking about the last part in their country, they don't have nobody to report to the city. So if we find something, we have to manage them. They have to ask advice how to manage because there is no like social services, child services, things like that.
Right. And we can give some more input off the side, some ways to help structure some of those situations to help when there's no social programs.
thank you, thanks for coming. I know your
Thank
legs
you.
are
Thank you.
probably asleep.